Welcome everyone to the January 8th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting. I'm going to ask for a roll call. And would you do that?
Sure. Joe Mann.
He is in the hospital right now, so sick, and I'll entertain a motion to excuse him.
Tom Stallberg.
Here.
Jim Bumker.
Here.
DG Garcia.
Here.
Charlie Jenks.
Here.
Dale Robbins. Phil Foyer.
Yes, I am here.
Gene Hushel. And Troy Molinitz.
Here.
Thank you.
Can I entertain a motion to excuse Joe Mann, and we'll just wait and see what happens with Dale?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, I know that we normally do the Pledge of Allegiance now. Before we stand up and do that, I just want to take a moment to reflect on a couple of things that have happened just since the beginning of the year with the mass murders in New Orleans, Las Vegas, New York, some of them domestic terrorism. The fires in California that as of the last time I just checked, we have 1.5 million people without power, over 100,000 evacuated, and 70,000 homes threatened, and the death of a president. So when we do our pledge, let's pledge ourselves to our nation, our community, and each other.
Roger, Roger.
Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Evan, can you advance the slide, please?
Well said, Tom. Thank you.
You know how much I love those invitations too. We did review the agenda. Does anybody have any changes in the agenda as presented? Okay, I'll
Move
Entertain a
to
motion.
approve.
thank you.
Second.
Second by DG.
I want to make a point of
This is
clarification. The
we're not to the
revised.
minutes yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is just the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Also, entertain a motion to approve the revised minutes from December 11th, 2024.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Charlie.
Second.
Second by Phil Foyer. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And we move on to the ratification of findings, conclusions, and recommendations. And I think, Lisa, for your presentation, you probably want to go through that.
Yes. So you will find the draft planning commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations in your packet. Again, this is just an updated version of the staff report, but it specifically reflects your conclusions and your recommendation. And this is what it says. The planning commission made the following conclusion regarding this amendment. The proposed amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan and is not detrimental to the public welfare. The proposed amendment is not warranted by a change in economic, technological, and/or land use conditions. The proposed amendment is not necessary to correct an error. The proposed amendment is necessary to clarify meaning or intent. The proposed amendment is necessary to provide for a proposed use that was not previously addressed. And the proposed amendment is deemed necessary as being in the public interest. And as far as the recommendation in the matter of the proposed amendments of the City of Liberty Lake Development Code and River District Development Regulations regarding limited use standards for emergency shelters as detailed in Exhibit A of this report, the City of Liberty Lake Planning Commission recommends to City Council that the amendment be approved.
I'll entertain a motion.
One question.
How about during discussion? Okay,
So do you need a motion?
We need a motion
So
to
moved.
approve. And second by Bumker. Discussion, Charlie.
Yeah, was this not part of the housing element discussion, this emergency bed issue?
So that was the whole, I'm sorry you missed the meeting because we did cover the fact that this, when we did the emergency housing in 2021, it was before the WACs were written, before we had any guidance on this. And one of the things we have to do a land capacity analysis as it's foundational for the comp plan. And one of the things that it specifically, that if we had separation distances, which we did, and if we had capacity limits, which we did, we would have to do a land capacity analysis specifically for emergency beds. Because of the separation distance that was included in that, there's no way we would have met the allocation for the emergency housing beds. By eliminating these, we are not required to actually do a land capacity
Okay.
analysis on it. And so it was the planning commission and deemed that this was necessary in order for us to complete the exercise of land capacity analysis.
Good.
Any other questions or discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passed unanimously. On
Awesome.
to the simplified version of the land analysis.
I'm going to do this as high level as I can, and this is very, very wonky, but I'll do the best I can. Next slide, please. So, just to kick it off, the land capacity analysis, or LCA, we've been talking about this in our discussions about comp plan for a while, but I want to really highlight what the purpose of the LCA is. There's really two basic points. It is a requirement of the Growth Management Act, but it's really intended to demonstrate that we have adequate land capacity to support projected growth of our population, and also demonstrate that we have adequate capacity to provide housing types that are affordable to all incomes. And that's different than providing housing that is affordable. And so, and we'll get into that a little bit in just a bit. If we cannot demonstrate that we have adequate land capacity for either the population or housing that is required, one of the things we would have to do through the course of our comp plan process is identify changes to our zoning classification or development standards to promote densification, and or as a last resort, look at the potential for expanding our urban growth area. And so that is the basis for why we're doing this and why we do it up front. Next slide, please. It's important to understand that this is basically a critical path to the entire comprehensive plan. The LCA is something that serves as a springboard for the evaluation of the capacity of sewer and water, utilities like electric and gas, capacity in our schools, the capacity of our parks, or the level of service of our parks, and the capacity or level of service of our emergency service providers. So it's a pretty critical piece just up front. Just because we know what the projection is for housing and for housing and population growth, we've got to figure out how we're going to provide all these other services. And that's an important aspect of the comp plan. And if we can't, then we have to look at other ways to address that, and whether that is shifting our allocation to others or not. The land capacity analysis, this whole allocation piece is like a first iteration. And each and every jurisdiction in the county is doing it right now. And these results will be compiled to determine if there needs to be a shifting of population, if there, or housing requirements, or if we need to look at an expansion overall in the urban growth area in the county. And Phil, I know you know this story because you have been at the table for a lot of years on
Right.
this issue.
I was just gonna have you expand a little bit, just for those that might not know, how this and the urban growth boundary go hand in hand, because if you have adequate lands, then chances of expanding the urban growth boundary are limited. Is that true?
That is true, but because of all the changes to the comprehensive plan, the Growth Management Act that have occurred over the last couple of years, the first line of defense is going to have to be looking at densification and all the different things we have to do to densify housing and population in our urban areas. And
Right.
by the way, the cities are considered part of the urban growth area.
Right.
We focus on within our boundaries and only look outside our boundaries if we can't achieve what we need to achieve within our boundaries. So that's
Thank
kind
you.
of foundational. Next slide, please. So first I want to give you, and before I take the deep dive into it, and the numbers and what we found in this, I want to give you just a high level overview of the process. Then I'll walk you through kind of a summary of the results. Next slide, please. So first step is really to identify projected need from 2020 to 2046. So 2020, we have the census results. And the two things that we need to identify is what is our projected population growth, and secondly, identify types and numbers of housing units needed for all income levels. And again, I want to note that both population growth and housing need is established at a county level. The population is tied to the Office of Financial Management, keeps track of our annual growth in both population and housing units. And they provide a projection, a high, medium, and low, and it's provided to the county. The county then looks at the trends and says, what is the right target, and then has to allocate that to all of the jurisdictions within the county.
Which they've done.
Which they have done, and they have done that. They've identified that we are in the medium growth rate based upon regression analysis, et cetera, which is contained in here. They have allocated to the jurisdictions based upon their population growth. They came up with a number for us, 21,934, that we agree with. Our regression analysis says, yep, that's about right. We take our regression analysis back to 2010 because I think it's good to capture those years when we had a downturn, because we don't know when we're not going to have a downturn again. So our regression analysis is a little bit more refined than what the county's doing, but hey, that's just us being wonky. Be that as it may, what it shows right now is that we're probably going to hit our build out for the city probably around 2042. So it's pretty accurate. In terms of the housing types, when they do this, the housing allocation Commerce has basically created a projection for what the housing need is for the county, and then the allocation by housing type. And then we have gone through a process with the housing allocation planning tool developed by Burke Consulting for Commerce to try and allocate those. Now, both population and housing, this is it is a first iteration for planning purposes to see how, if the various jurisdictions have the capacity to handle their allocation. So that's why this is really a critical path. Next slide, please.
Lisa, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Not to backtrack a little bit, but you said that the city goes back to, or went back to 2010. How far was the county going back in there?
They went back to the 2020 census.
That's it?
Or no, I'm sorry, they went back to the last comp plan cycle, which was 2015, 2017, something like that.
So they're not using as much data for that.
They're not using as much data, but that's okay because we end up in the same place. And we're all using OFM's data, and OFM's data is all based upon, and you'll see this later, we circle back to the methodology that they use when every year they ask us for the housing counts housing that has gone to a certificate of occupancy, how many in each category. And then they project what our population growth is based upon multiplying the housing growth in each category by the per capita size of each of those based upon census data, based upon the occupancy rate of each type of housing, and both per capita and vacancy rates differ between single family versus duplex, triplex, quads versus multifamily. And so there are different, each of them is calculated a little bit differently, but what that ends up with is it produces an estimate of the population. Oh, by the way, it's the same formula that the census uses for population estimates between censuses.
Has that changed recently with the way the economy is and how expensive housing is, that more people are in those households than before on average?
So it has not changed since the 2020 census, but that's relatively recent. So again, that's one of the downsides of this. This is a mathematical exercise, guys. And we know that the circumstances are going to change. And it's one of the things that as we look at what happens with the cost of housing, the cost of living, things are going to change. And with the changes that Commerce is mandating of us as it relates to what we allow for housing, the ADUs that we allow, what we allow in different zones. I believe that that's going to also change those numbers. It's like it's circular almost. It's going to change what those per capita household sizes are. It's also going to change vacancy rates. So all we can work with is a point in time. So after we have identified the need, the next thing we do is identify capacity. And basically we're looking at a process going through, first of all, identifying all the housing by type that's been constructed in Liberty Lake since 2020. It's not an inconsequential number. We've had over 900 units that have been constructed since 2020. That's pretty substantial for our little city. Then we look at entitled projects, and I want to take a minute to talk about what entitled projects are. Entitled means they have a level of approval that means that as long as they meet all of our standards going forward, that we have to approve it. It's an ministerial action to approve the permit once we've checked the box that they've met all of the standards. So that would include subdivisions that have already been, so vacant lands on platted but not constructed. So we have a handful, we have a couple dozen in Legacy Ridge. We have a handful in Rocky Hill, even though those two, actually, I think it's more like 2 or 3, but whatever. But those are subdivisions that are completely platted already. And yet we still have some entitled that don't go towards our housing counts. We also have approved preliminary plats that is not final platted. Now, all of our plats are active right now. They're phased plats, and part of them is platted and part of them is not. What we know is that there's an entitlement tied to the preliminary plat, that if we take the number of units that have been platted thus far and look at the remaining land, we know how much is entitled on the remaining part that's not platted yet. It's a little more complicated for more, some of the mixed use zones like River District and whatnot, but it's clear what lots they intended to be multifamily, and we can use existing densities in their multifamily developments that have already occurred to estimate what's happening on those lots. So that's entitled projects. It also includes entitled projects, or like BSPs that have already been approved, where in a mixed use zone where a portion of it is commercial and a portion of it is residential. That is the way that in mixed use zones, people get the entitlement for multifamily developments, and we have a number of those. We've actually called out exactly which ones those are in the maps and whatnot. It also includes projects that have been permitted or even are under construction, but hadn't yet received the CO at the time of our cutoff. And we collected all of our data. We closed out the data at the end of August of 2024, because I have to have a stopping point so that I can move forward with the analysis. So anyhow, so that's just, again, for vacant, and then the next step is vacant residential and mixed use properties. There aren't a heck of a lot left. And what we did for those is we looked at the zoning, we looked at kind of the highest density of housing, or the most affordable version of housing that's allowed on that. For example, there are 35 acres that are part of the gun club property that are zoned R2 that the school district is planning on surplusing. We assumed that because it's an R2, they can do duplexes, triplexes, and quads. We assumed it to be that, and we used the density associated with that zone after we backed out an assumption about right-of-way. And we assumed that right-of-way and utilities would encompass about 15% of that project.
So that's what you mean by infrastructure,
Yes.
roadways, parks.
So parks are a different beast. We don't have any requirements for parks in there, but I'll get to what has been excluded in this at the end of it. But for the few, we don't have any requirements for them to dedicate parks. However, there is a piece that the school district is going to develop as a park that they're using to basically inter the contamination from the gun club site. And so we didn't include that as part of that. And we didn't include any parks, lands, or we didn't include any, we didn't include any platted HOA open space, platted, or we didn't include any public or private rights of way. And we actually had to, because we didn't have a separate layer for this, we actually had to do a calculation, hand calculate the major utility corridors like the TC gas corridor that cuts through the city. It's 100-foot wide swath, and it significantly impacts some pretty big properties. We also have some 100-foot wide utility easements for overhead power lines. Those aren't going away. Those aren't going anywhere. So we backed those types of utilities out of the developable land on those. So anyhow, so we go through a process looking at vacant resident, and really it's only residential and mixed use for the purpose of the land, or for the purpose of the housing analysis and the population analysis. And we basically kind of hand calculated them. And you're actually going to see the assumptions that we used in the land capacity analysis in the tables that we included in there. And it was a hand calculation for each piece because we're small enough that we could do that. And because there's few enough of them that we could do that. Others had to be a little bit, City of Spokane Valley, County, they need to be a little bit, need to make broader assumptions. We were able to really hand calculate.
Just a quick question. That says vacant residential and mixed use properties. Does that include city owned property?
I was just gonna ask that, yeah.
Only if it's residentially or mixed use zoned, and we don't have any of those. Publicly zoned properties are publicly zoned for a reason, because they're intended for public purposes. We legitimately can exclude those from the analysis.
Okay, that's
So.
good.
And then the last piece is underutilized residential and mixed-use properties. Now, that's part of the methodology countywide. Typically, we have smaller lots than a lot of other communities. The one exception is, of course, the areas where we have topographic challenges. So Legacy Ridge, Bella Lago, and et cetera. So we specifically did not look at those because a significant portion of those larger lots are in areas that would effectively be critical areas, greater than 30% slope, or they're not feasible to redevelop. So at the end of the day, the only underutilized residential and mixed-use properties were actually the MTC campus that was recently rezoned. Some of those we actually considered as vacant because all they had on them was parking. And so for the purposes of the analysis, it was an easier analysis. Some of them were underutilized where they have a building on a portion of it and with parking, but they have way more parking than what they need to. And so literally, again, because it was a handful of properties, we went in and we actually identified what the area is that was available to develop and then applied some densities to that. Yes,
One question.
yes.
On the MTC, I'm excited about the fact that you just looked at those. I think that's fantastic. Because it's just an opportunity waiting for something to happen, in my opinion.
Mhm.
But you mentioned the development agreements in this document.
Yeah, so
What is, was it conditional zoning or?
that's effectively, that's how you do conditional zoning in Washington, is through a development agreement at the time of zoning. And so so they're limited in height on the apartments. That's number one. Number two, they're limited in certain locations on the Moulter Avenue. They can have multifamily if it fronts on Moulter. On Mission Avenue, it has to be ground floor commercial. Right now, because our code requires 1-for-1 for mixed use in the mixed use zones. What that really means is that if you're doing vertically mixed use, it's 1 floor of commercial and 1 floor of residential. So that's how we did the calculation. That's something we're going to look at when we do our housing policy and some of the things that we think are obstacles to affordable housing, and we may look at vertical. I think that is one of typically when you do a vertically mixed use building, you probably want to do at least 2, sometimes even 3 floors, depending upon what your height limits are over the first floor commercial. And so that's something we can talk about as a planning commission as we go through the policies and what are some of the obstacles.
I think that's really exciting.
Yeah.
That'd be fantastic.
It's just one other question with respect, well, I mean, it applies mainly with MTC, but it could apply to any area that is zoned mixed use if the building is vacant. How is that? If there's an existing building that was originally commercial and it's vacant, how is that considered in this analysis?
It was not considered at all because I don't have an inventory of vacant
Gotcha.
buildings.
So that's not part of,
And we don't have
It's
the
not
code
part of the
right now. We
capacity.
could have done that.
but it's not part of the capacity that we kept.
It's not, we could have gone there with the ordinances that were required to pass, of which that is one. The
But so
conversion
it's
thing.
not included according to the analysis, you don't really need to include it.
Exactly.
So, okay. Fair enough.
Next slide.
So
please.
can I ask a question
Sure.
to follow up on that? That was half of my question. The other half is, how do you interpret the parking lots that are just parking lots that are underutilized in the MTC?
So the ones that are underutilized,
Is that part of the equation?
what I did was I went through and I said, okay, what's the building there and how much of the parking is what necessary for that particular building? Again, typically we had Some of them were 30%, some of them were 40% that were developable. It depended upon the site. I literally went into Scout and drew the areas, figured it out to figure out what the area was. For the multifamily, I applied what we have seen multifamily to develop at. So that would include the parking. So I wasn't worried about preserving parking for multifamily. I was using the 18 units per acre because that's about what we're seeing in our multifamily with the parking provided. So that was a simple calculation as long as I provided enough, presumably enough parking for whatever the business was.
One
Or
other,
the
since we're
commercial
talking about mixed use, I noticed in your chart here, you called out some individual parcels in the M2 zone and a maximum allowable. How does the M2 code where it's 50/50, how does that come into play if somebody wanted to do like a cottage product?
So they,
Cottage, it's in the zoning matrix as allowable, but
but
it's
we don't
not
have a
commercial.
standard. We don't have a standard. That is something that has to be fixed in there. And the other thing I'm going to say is that it's going to be very hard to do a cottage product in the M2 zone because there is a minimum density of 12 units to the acre. You could potentially, but it would be a minimum of, if you could hit that minimum net dense, it's a minimum net density. 12
Okay.
units. So it's a little challenging the way it's written right now. That'll be one of the things that as we go through the housing policy and look at opportunities to try and improve our ability to deliver some of these different housing types. That will be one of the
What's
ones.
a cottage?
So typically a cottage is a single cottage development is where you have single units. They can be smaller units sometimes. They often are smaller units with all on one parcel with possibly a shared community center. It's kind of
Like
like
a courtyard.
concept.
I'm sorry, like a courtyard.
A courtyard, sometimes a shared community building,
Mm.
even. It could be with shared parking, as opposed to individual parking. That's often the way it's done. There's a lot of advantages to that from an affordability
Sure.
standpoint.
Gotcha. Okay,
And so anyhow, yeah.
okay.
So next slide, please. Oh, wait, did I talk about this? So now we're at the comparing housing capacity. So we total all of these and we know what our housing capacity is based upon looking at those 4 categories that we've just analyzed. And we need to compare it to the housing need that was identified. So, so next slide, please. And the last piece of it, which is kind of, it almost feels like it's circular logic, but it's really not. The last piece of it is because there's 2 prongs to this. One is housing. We focused heavily on the housing piece because that was the big lift. The housing piece also enables us to get to the population capacity. And again, this is going back to, we look at the total housing units by housing type. We then multiply that by the average per capita household size and we're using OFM's data because it's the least challengeable of the data, even though we know it's going to change. And we multiply that by the vacancy rate for that housing type. And that gives us the total population that's the capacity for the housing capacity that we have. And then we compare that back to what the county said our population was. So next slide, please. And then the last piece is that we also, as part of this, it doesn't, and there's not really a nexus in the Growth Management Act. We are also required to do an inventory of commercial and industrial lands. And the concept is supposed to be so that we can show that we have enough developable lands to balance the needs of our residential. But because there are no great metrics for it, all we're really required to do under the code is to do this inventory. So we've done this. And I actually have a map in there that shows you the vacant commercial and industrial lands. And we have the data. We have to identify the zoning category in the land area, and we've done that. It's actually probably a potentially useful tool for other things as well, but for our purposes, that's.
My concern is, I think what you've done is terrific. Today, the budget for the city, just shy of 50% of the revenue is sales tax. Are you saying tonight that the projections you've put on paper for housing can be addressed by the existing inventory of commercial and therefore generate enough revenue to keep the city running? Or should there be some additional analyses that at least starts to quantify, we have this much now with this many housing units, we'll need this much commercial, because if we don't, then we can't have this many housing units.
That's a separate question. That is absolutely a separate question. It is outside of the realm of the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan lays a good foundation to do that next level. And it's something that we probably as a city need to recognize as we approach build out. It's a great point. And
It's too late when you're approaching build out.
well, we've got 20 years till we hit build out. But the reason why we need to be talking about it now is because we are super fortunate because we have a very robust sales tax, most of which comes from the sale of RVs, trucks, Caterpillars, etc. And we've got more of that coming.
God bless them.
We've got more of that coming. But it also, some of what helps us to, like for our road maintenance and our road, a lot of that has to do with REIT. REIT is basically an excise tax that we collect, and it's used for specific capital purposes. That's great while you have it. When we stop creating lots, we're going to see a lot less turnover of land, so we will see a significant reduction in the excise tax. The other thing is that while it's not the most significant part of the sales tax that we generate through construction is not inconsequential. And so those are all things that are going to be factored in. It's something that Mark and Kyle and the mayor are already talking about now in terms of the long range planning for this. This document will be foundational for some of that, for sure. But and again, this is the beginning of the process. We will have to look at how our codes change, both based upon what the state says we have to change, but also what makes sense for our community as we go through this process. So this is just the first salvo, and it's obviously it's foundational information.
So if you do the comprehensive plan and it goes, everybody reviews it, the county reviews it, the state reviews it, the Department of Commerce is happy with what we've done. And then a decade later, you've got a problem. You're not achieving the housing numbers and whatnot.
So that's one of the things.
What
that
happened?
That's one of the things that changed with the Growth Management Act. It used to be that we did these every 8 years.
Mhm.
Now they changed it to 10 years. But in 5 years, we have to evaluate the implementation of this plan. And one of the things that I'm proposing for us to do as part of this, and I think, and it's one of the things that really jumped out at me when I first got here, is the lack of an implementation chapter. It's great to have a plan, but it's not very meaningful if you don't have an implementation strategy. And so the implementation plan, which is going to be a new chapter, is really going to set the table for that 5 year. So where are we at? Are we doing what we said we were going to do? What do we need to adjust? And and again,
Okay. Sounds good.
okay, next slide, please. So I didn't mention this earlier, that we excluded specifically some things from the capacity, land capacity analysis. And this, again, we're following a methodology that has been adopted generally for all the jurisdictions in the county, so we have to follow some of this.
Lisa, what's a critical area?
A
Give them
critical area is a wetland. It could be a shoreline. We don't have any shorelines in the city. Okay.
Knock,
Yes, knock, knock. We, it includes 30 areas, that are considered geologically hazardous. And so one of the criteria and that qualifies it is greater than 30% slope. We do have, that's probably the most significant critical area that we have in the city is the 30% slopes, and it's in very specific areas. And you'll see when we get to how we dealt with vacant parcels that we actually included that consideration in our assumptions about development on those parcels.
it includes floodplains and so on.
It does include floodplains in the city of Liberty Lake. We have, other than a portion of Trailhead, which is in a floodplain. We have two very small areas, one of which is owned by an HOA and the other of which, when it's platted, will be owned by an HOA because it is in a riparian area that was required as part of the SAP. And both of those are less than an acre, by the way. So we do have a flood management prevention ordinance as part of our critical area ordinances. We did that not because we have anything to manage in the floodplains so much as we wanted to qualify for FEMA funds.
Whatever's left.
Anyhow, great question. Thank you. Next slide, please. So now that we've gotten through this, so that's the overview of the process. And now we're going to kind of walk through what the results were. So first, the needs analysis. Again, as I pointed out earlier, the county has allocated 21,934 population for us in 2046. And next slide, please.
Well, before you leave that one, it's just interesting that the county has allocated to the city of Liberty Lake the largest percentage increase.
It's based upon a regression
Just
analysis.
saying.
And we agree with that based upon our own regression analysis. So as you can see, we have us hitting that in 2042. Again, one of the things is that this is a pretty linear analysis. And one of the things that we know happens is as you kind of get to the end of the available lands, growth kind of slows down and it flattens out. So I think it's probably a fair assumption. Again, if future growth is consistent with past growth, which is something that planners often talk about as being not always a very reasonable assumption.
Well, the other comment is understanding what our required job is with respect to land capacity use, and does it match up with these projections? And to Charlie's point, what does it say in terms of services that are going to be required and the cost of the services? That is not even part of this analysis.
Yet, but this analysis is then what's sent to the various providers so that we can evaluate it. And oh, by the way, that's why it's an iterative process. If we send it to the providers and they're like, yeah, we don't have that. We just don't have that water capacity. We just don't have that sewer capacity. That has to happen everywhere in the county. We really have to look at that. And that is one of the constraining points within this that we have to look at. This is frankly an unconstrained analysis at this
It
point.
really is. It says,
But
here's
it's-
land, but in terms.
But it's the first step.
Okay.
So.
Can I add a couple
Great
things?
point. Yeah,
The reason why they higher percentage, I think, is the majority of the lands we have left available are all higher density residential.
I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other part of this equation is the mayor, the council, they all need to, when they set their budgets, they need to be thinking long-term strategies without using short-term revenues. And I think that answers a lot of these other questions.
You're absolutely right, and that is going to be a big part of the conversation with council at the
Mhm.
retreat coming up in February, because that really, as we look at capital facilities plan, that's kind of the first piece of it. And so all of these conversations are going on at the same time. One of the things I will say is that we haven't raised our property taxes as long as I've been here, and probably for years beyond that. But the city has always reserved the ability to do that. And I don't know how far back, I can't think off the top of my head right now, how far back you can go on that. But yes, there is that potential at some point. But you would hate, as we talked about, when we talked about the stormwater master plan, financial strategy, the last thing you want to do is say, oh my gosh, well, we're to the end of build out. Okay, let's take everything and let's see a big jump all at once. Being a little bit judicious about that.
Is it hypothetically possible in this exercise that as the planning process continues, could it be that the conclusion comes to is that there's not enough future revenue to support that type of growth?
That's-
Therefore, we have to cut it back?
That is not part of the equation as per the Growth Management Act and as per the adopted methodology. So there is, that is the reality check. But it's not part of this conversation. It could be part of other conversations we have with as a city, as the city council will have, looking forward as we have the data to kind of say, this is what it looks like right now. And so that's, again,
Hence the 5-year data check.
exactly.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So I want to go back to this, just touch on it briefly. So this is what Commerce has told us, and you've seen this slide before. What Commerce has told us the assumed affordability is. So detached single-family homes are higher income, greater than 120% of the area median income. Townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, fourplexes are considered to be affordable for 80 to 120% of the AMI. Walk-up apartments and condominiums are affordable 0 to 80%. Apartments and condos are affordable 0 to 80%. And accessory dwelling units are only affordable for 50 to 80%. But the thing is that we don't really, what we're able to categorize is single family / townhomes, because most of the townhomes that have been built in the city have been built as 0 lot lines. So the assessor's records don't differentiate between them. So we have consolidated single family and townhomes as one category. So duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, yes. Multifamily, yes. And we have manufactured homes and ADUs, which really are almost non-existent thing in the city of Liberty Lake for new ones. So bottom line is that we end up, when you look at what is included in these, we have to actually collapse these categories. And so we've collapsed it such that, and I wrote this down somewhere. So basically, single family and townhomes we're considering higher than 120%, which I think is probably true in the city anyhow. The duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes are 80 to 120%, and everything else is 0 to 80%. And we look at it, so we've collapsed these a little bit to make it a little bit so that it's consistent with the way we have reported our data in the past to OFM, how we collect data through permits, etc. So next slide, please. So this is, bottom line is, when we total the constructed, the entitled, are projected for Oh, I'm sorry, this is the allocation. So this is what the allocation said. Projected housing needs as 3,557 is what we need to provide for the 0 to 80. Again, we're looking at categories, right? Housing allocation for 80 to 120 is a little bit over 600. Housing allocation for greater than 120 is 1,100 and change. It also does include emergency housing beds, but again, we talk about that at the end. Next slide, please. So the land capacity analysis. So this is where we get into actually the totals, and I'm just going to go through this relatively quickly in terms of what we came up with. So as I said, first category was housing units constructed, that just a little bit over 900. Next slide, please. And we have categorized them, as I said, in those categories we talked about. Again, here's the entitled developments, a map of them, and you can cross-reference them as we talk about them. So in addition to the subdivisions, which I know you all recognize, we have identified the entitled multifamily projects. So the Signal Point Apartments next to the MTC zone, the Stanley Apartments, which are in that triangular piece on the southwest corner of Kramer and Country Vista. The Stanley Apartments, I'm sorry, not the Stanley Apartments, the Liberty Heights Apartments, also known as Jake's Townhome, just below Legacy Ridge. And then we've also included Centennial multifamily properties on the south side of Country Vista, because those are entitled through a recorded binding site plan. So that is kind of the entitled. Next slide, please. And as I said, we did, when we looked at it, we did total the vacant platted single family lots across the city and came up with 170. Multifamily projects total a little bit 2,200 and change. And then the total units and the types of units by subdivision. I want to, in terms of what's remaining that has not already been constructed. So those are the entitled house. We have 4,217 entitled housing units. That's the majority of what our projection is. I want to say that there is this market factor that it will require to the methodology that's been adopted by the Growth Management Act says we have to apply a market factor, and it's determined by the community. In Spokane County, the market factor has been 30%, and it's been 30% for a number of years. One of the reasons why that is because there are several well-known large property owners that have a very long view of developing property and don't believe in selling their property. Is that a fair way to put it?
There.
Then there's another family also that's well known. Anyhow, long story short is that that's the counties. For already constructed, clearly there's no market factor. For entitled, we feel like there's no market factor because for us, our subdivisions, these are phase subdivisions, they're active developments, all are regularly platting additional phases. They're all entitled to extend their approvals for another round because they've platted a phase during the time of their last extension, and in most cases, several phases. So we didn't apply a market factor here because these are going to get built out. No question about it. But next slide, please. The next category we have are the vacant residential. This is where I think we did the calculations. So let's go. So I want to first let me point out what we have. So we have really only a handful of vacant residential or mixed use properties. We've got the gun club site, only the portion that the school district intends to surplus. That's zoned R2. And over on the edge of the city, we've got the second phase for Bella Lago, and there's a property to the north of that Peel property that was also, that's also within that. There's a lot of steep slope in there. They're gonna have to go through, they're gonna have to go through a process to even be entitled. There is a conceptual plat associated with it. And I think, so the Bella Lago Phase 2, they're looking at 20 units. On the entire property. It's a very, very low density and they'll be lucky. They have to do a reasonable use demonstration on that one. And the property to the north is in similar straits. And so so again, we have done a calculation. These are very low density developments because of the critical area of the 30% slope. Yeah.
Question on the school property, when the zone change was made, I thought there was a limitation on the density along with that.
So, well, it's the density of the R2 zone, which is 12 units per acre. But it does allow for duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. So that was the density that we used for that.
I don't know why I feel like I remembered something different on that, but maybe not.
That was kind of the conversation that there was some conversation around that. But it ended up that they just went with they felt that the density for it's not M2, it's R2, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. R2.
So for that property, we assumed that they would do duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. They do it to the maximum density. We assume 15% of the land area would go for infrastructure, which would be roads and stormwater, et cetera. So those were relatively easy to do the calculations on. For parcels 2 and 3, that's the Toledo Station. It's a RDC zone, which is freeway commercial, but it does also allow for some multifamily. And so, but because the highest and best use is probably going to be industrial development, commercial light industrial development, we assumed that there was the potential for 10% of it. And I know that there is some discussion for a little bit of that to be multifamily. And so we made some assumptions about that. Again, we used the 10% with a density of 18 units per acre on that 10%. But we had to, that was a particularly unique piece because we have both overhead utility easements and we have the TCE gas line. And together, those total more than 11 acres of area that can't be developed. So we had to deduct that right off the top. Then we applied applied the infrastructure category and then but assumed only 10% would be residential. The other properties in the River District those are that we've identified are Herman Family Estates. There's 3 or 4 of them. They're right in the vicinity. They're to the east of Bitterroot and to the south of the Courtyard East Apartments. And so we presumed that the logical.
Which number is that on? Is that number?
So
4?
it's 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'll talk about 4 in a second. 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we just assumed that they would develop at the same as multifamily in the same density that Bitterroot and Courtyard East have developed.
What was 4?
What 4 is, it's a mixed use piece. It's an M2 piece that was part of the part of the Legacy Ridge West plat.
Yeah.
People have been kicking the tires on that as a mixed use. It was assumed to be a mixed use so we did that just as a 50-50. It could go, actually, it could go all commercial, but because I've had enough people kicking the tires on that, one that we did the 50-50 on. And then the other ones, 9, 10, and 11 are the vacant properties in Meadowwood Tech Campus. And when I say vacant, they contain a lot of landscaping and a lot of parking lot, and we assume that's low hanging fruit. And so we looked at the properties fronting on Moulter could be multifamily, so we assumed that to be so. We, the property in the rear to the north of the Liberty Launch Academy site is adjacent to the Signal Point Apartments, so we assumed those to be also multifamily at the same density. And, but the ones fronting on, the ones fronting on Mission Avenue, because the development agreement, that's the one that I was talking about that has the mixed use. The mixed use, it has to be ground floor commercial. And so we did 1 for 1, 1 floor, commercial, 1 floor residential.
Makes sense.
So
Is the Huntwood property not mixed use?
it is not mixed use. We encouraged them to piggyback on the Greenstone proposal for MTC. And they said, yeah, no, we like it as a light industrial. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodness. I knew there was something there.
Okay, no, it's a good question. It is in the industrial, in commercial and industrial inventory. Next slide, please. So basically, this is what I wanted. So I mean, literally, we hand calculated each individual piece given its unique considerations and the zoning. Again, the assumption is we maximize the density and and basically maximize the affordability component that was allowed in that zone. But applied other factors to kind of balance out things like critical areas, et cetera. But in this case, again, going back to the market factor, this is where we totaled these all up, and then we've applied the market factor here at 30%, saying, oh, okay, so this is our best swag, but market may have a different idea.
So could you explain again, I'm sorry, the 30% market factor?
So,
What's the basis for that?
so basis for that is, well, there is no basis for that, first of all. I gotta say that there is no basis for that.
Swag.
It's an arbitrary number.
It's an arbitrary number that the county has been using for the last several cycles of the comp plan can I say it's considered the Douglas factor?
Just throw it out there.
It's considered the Douglas factor.
What factor?
It's an inside joke.
Well, the thing about
Two
that-
S's. You know what it is.
The, obviously, basically what you're saying is that in terms of, single family townhomes, pretty much nothing.
So,
And I'm looking at that, and
Well,
I'm
that's-
looking at area, 12, no way. I mean, I know where area 12 is. I don't see how they can put anything there.
well, they're actually doing the geotechnical evaluations and whatnot. They are indeed working through the,
Anyway,
so again, I've got, so that's my basis for including that.
Gotcha.
But the 30% market factor, what it's intended to be, so, and this is,
Yeah.
it's written right into the commerce guidelines. It's been in the land capacity analysis for the last several cycles at least, is that jurisdictions can provide what they consider to be a reasonable rate of adjustment for what the capacity is based upon their individual markets and how much of that may not be ripe for development at this time, kind of thing. We're in the 20-year planning window. And so, as I said, our methodology has to align with the counties to the extent that, I mean, we've got to justify what we're doing. In this particular case, I think that I'd like to refer to the market factor as the swag factor. And that's I guess that's what it is. But the 30% is, other communities have 20%, 25%. I think, areas where they've seen a lot of growth have gone as low as 10 or 15%. But the adopted methodology has us at 30%, so that's what it is.
Yep.
Next slide, please. The last one to calculate is the underutilized mixed use, and we really don't have any residential that's underutilized for the reasons that I stated. The areas where we have larger lots are topographically challenged and therefore justified to address the slopes and the buildability, I guess. Next slide, please. So all of the, as I said, all of the underutilized mixed use stuff is in Meadowood Technology Campus. Literally took the scout map, drew the area that appeared to be developable, got the acreage. Again, don't assume any need for additional circulation, infrastructure, et cetera, because it's kind of already there. And we just applied the percent redevelopable by 18 units per acre for the multifamily. For the mixed use, again, figured out what that floor looked like, the percent of the building coverage, and then figured the first floor was all commercial and the second floor was all residential, and used a rate of 2,000 square feet per apartment to encompass hallways and common areas, lobbies, etc. Typically, you're looking at 1,000 or 1,100. And then again, we applied the market factor as I said, we're so that we can demonstrate that we're complying with the methodology. And so, but these are really relatively, since most of our stuff is entitled or already built, the market factor really has very little impact on us. Next slide, please. So here is the housing capacity, the totals. And again, single family townhomes, which again, I want to say greater than 120% AMI is what that category meets. The duplexes, triplexes, and quads are dealing with the 80 to 120%. The multifamily condos and institutional and manufactured homes and ADUs. And we didn't really do any projections because that's a swag. We don't have all that many ADUs right now. I think we'll have more as we move forward, but I can't project what that is. And we didn't need to. I could have taken a swag at that, but didn't need to. Bottom line, those all fall within the 0 to 80% category. Next slide, please. So now that we have the totals, we need to do the comparison of our need to the capacity. So let's do that. Next slide, please. Again, just wanted to remind you how it was categorized and that we had to collapse it based upon the way we track the housing types. Next slide, please. And so this is what it looks like. Our housing allocation for 0 to 80% was 3,557, and we're at 3,838. So 80 to 120% AMI. Keep in mind, and I'm going to say this because I see you. I'm not saying that that's how many affordable units we have. That's how many units of capacity we have for housing types that are assumed to be affordable. There's a difference. And the assumed affordability comes from commerce, so I can't justify that. So again, 80 to 120%, 613 units is what we have been allocated, 632 is what we're projecting. Greater than 120% of AMI is 1,143 is what our allocation is, and we're projecting a little bit over 1,400. So the bottom line is we appear to have the capacity.
Do we have to approve this or is this just FYI?
So let's go to the next slide, please.
Can I ask a quick question
Sure.
on that AMI one? Who determines scale,
The scale of what?
the different
The
AMI
affordability.
affordability?
That is, AMI is the area median income for Spokane County, because we plan on a countywide basis. Though those ranges were established by those Commerce. And so Commerce came up with what the assumed affordability of different housing types were. Now, some of them assume that there's subsidy, and that's a whole different thing that we're going to get into with housing policy, and which really is not something that we would expect to occur to any great degree on a local level. It's really
Do you happen to know what the EMI is for Spokane County?
Yeah.
It's done by-
89,000.
Yeah, it's done based upon household size.
Right.
So the rate, but the range is, yeah, that's the
I-
average.
I looked it up earlier. It's
That is the average, and it's,
89,000 for the county.
89,000.
Liberty Lake is 105,600
but what applies here
is
is
the county.
is the
But I
county.
guess, so the reason why I asked the question is, it's a land analysis, land capacity analysis. So really, does the AMI have any weight in this?
It does, and the reason why it does is because it used to be just a land capacity analysis for population, and now we have population and housing. The AMI has to do with that affordability for all requirement,
Which is driven by,
which is driven by HB 1220. It's state law.
or let's state legislature base.
Yes, sir.
And just an observation, like we've talked earlier, how do we, down the road, 10 years from now, how does the city pay, be able to provide services for all this land, potential land capacity, so on and so on. So I'm assuming nothing is taken into consideration as it relates to water.
We have to,
Water availability.
we have to consider water availability. The county is doing that with all of the water purveyors countywide. We will be, once we have an approval, and we're going to be asking for you to answer your question, we're going to be asking for you when you're comfortable with it, to make a recommendation to approve this for planning purposes, and we'll be asking the county or the council to do the same. Once they have adopted that, we will be sending it out to our water and sewer purveyors, to the school district, to Avista, to our emergency service providers, Spokane Valley Fire and PD, all of which they're going to be weighing in on what the implications of this are and there is the potential to adjust that. That's the iterative process that I talked about. And so, but that's happening all the jurisdictions all at the same time. So it's how effective it is a whole different question.
So if water comes back and says, we can't get there from here. There's no way we can serve this many units in this time frame. Period. Then that's gonna come back and there's gonna be a shakedown of what you've assumed here.
That's not likely to happen on the water side. On the sewer side, it's a question of infrastructure.
It's money.
It's money, and yes, and the way water and sewer works is that ERU you pay to connect in is actually a capitalization fee. It's you paying for the capital cost of the infrastructure that you're now going to use. And so what they do is they basically charge that ERU as a capital cost. It's almost like an impact fee. They just don't call it that because it's
Trust me, yeah,
right?
right. And it's a lot. We'll leave it at that.
So the population and growth is then pushed out to all these entities and they're asked to plan for their needs based upon what are the projected population growth, housing growth is. But again, there is the potential, as I said, it's an iterative process, and where there are, it's not a problem for us because we're over the aquifer. It's gonna, but in other areas where it's not, where the water source is not the aquifer, there may be some additional limitations. So one of the things that happens is, in that case, there may be a reshuffling of some of the capacity. We have capacity. We have a little bit extra capacity, but we don't have a lot of extra capacity. It's the Goldilocks zone. To quote Mark. Okay, so the next piece, we also do have to prove the population capacity. So let me just point that out, and then I'll talk about what comes next. Population capacity, next slide, please. Again, reminding you what the population is. Next slide, please. And basically, as I said, what we did was we took each of the categories and using the rates that OFM provides us, which are based on census data, we multiply the number of housing units by the per capita household size for that housing type by the vacancy rate for that housing type to come up with a population capacity based upon that housing. And again, as I said, this is the methodology that they use each year when they ask us, so how many COs did you issue and what types of housing are they? And then we have to go through and do this calculation. And then that's the basis for the population estimates that OFM comes out with. And as I said, it is the same methodology. It's the same methodology that the census uses for their population estimates between the censuses.
Does the state also give you a vacancy rate to use?
Yes. Yes,
So they just tell you what to use.
yes. Yeah, but it's based
And-
on census
And
data.
if that doesn't comport with what's happening,
Doesn't matter.
doesn't matter. Okay, I got it.
So,
But census data
But-
does.
but the census data is, but they're slow to recognize changes in the census data. That's the problem. And so, but we follow the methodology that the state uses, and this is the most defensible way for us to demonstrate population capacity using the same methodology that the state uses. Next slide, please. The last piece is that we do have to do a commercial and industrial lands inventory. Next slide, please. So these are your vacant and underutilized. The yellow ones are vacant, the green ones are underutilized. And next slide, please. We have a spreadsheet in Appendix B, by the way, and you can, I didn't even, it's too long of a spreadsheet, but all the details are in there. And so here's where we're at, next steps. So I have tentatively scheduled a workshop again for January 22nd, if you feel the need for it, to talk more about this land capacity analysis. And perhaps after you've had kind of my download on the process and whatnot, you may want to go back and read it again and then just give some consideration. Either tonight, if you're comfortable, or at that meeting, I'd like to ask for a recommendation for the approval for planning purposes, so that we are planning on presenting the LCA to City Council on February 4th. And again, once they approve it for planning purposes, it will be distributed to partner agencies and consultants, as well as the county and other jurisdictions, so that we can do this joint planning process. But this serves as a foundation for us. I have already shared the draft with our consultants that for our housing policy piece, and the consultants that are working on the scope for our network, our transportation network analysis. And so, and obviously I'll give them finals, but I want them to have kind of a sense of where we're landing.
So the only difference, as I see it, Lisa, with this, to what we already approved, is that we're missing 3 members that may have some additional input and questions. And otherwise, I would I would entertain a motion that we recommend approval right now, but we've got all the rest of the people that, and Joe's a big part of that, but the other two. that-
Absolutely. He's got some experience in
And,
this.
and I just say that not that we want to take a lot of time to review the whole thing again, because it's our responsibility to review this beforehand, even though I have to have it translated sometimes. I think we could do it in a half an hour or so and then move on to the next.
I will say that my expectation was that as I started this conversation, I said, I understood that this was very wonky. And it's something we have to do, and it's a painful math exercise. And my hope was that by giving you kind of the overview of the process and walking you through some of the nuances of it, that you could go back through and read it, and it would be more digestible the second time.
I think you explained it well, and to the questions, the answer to most of the questions that we had was because we were told to do it this way. So, I mean,
But it's not
some of us
the
have-
answer, but it's
some of us have taken
writing.
orders before. Phil, DG.
I just have two requests. I think they're important. My eye is just strained looking at this color. It's not conducive to really understanding for people to see what they're looking at. The white on top of the colors are just not very readable. And if we can put all graphs such as this, all tables such as this in a landscape.
And landscape and stuff.
They
Because
actually were, but when it prints, it doesn't print out that way. Unfortunately, but your appendices, which have all the details in them,
Hard,
should be.
Yeah.
And I can send
is
out,
this a handout that others will get?
unfortunately, so again, when I print it, it
Mhm.
is in the PDF, it is landscape, but when it prints on my printer, it prints out this way. So if you look at the PDFs that I sent you, you'll see that. they have
Right, but I
landscape.
mean,
Yeah.
the PDFs that you sent us are on, we would print them out, of course, but is anybody else gonna be receiving these handouts?
So, no, not the paper copies. We'd be
Okay.
posting we'd be
No,
posting the
so what
PDF.
I mean, is if we can even turn these in a landscape position on the items that your computer can do it, you just don't know how to set it up that way,
No, my
Right?
computer does it. My computer has done it. The
but
printer can't.
time to get a new printer?
What we have here is a failure to communicate.
Yeah, the computer and
Yeah,
so
so-
there's gotta be a way,
Yeah, there's got to be a way if I hire a printer to print it,
if you purchase a printer that will do that.
or if I hire a printer to print it,
You
because
set
we
it up.
just
Oh, yeah.
purchased
You
this.
set it out,
Yes.
have it printed.
They could print it.
Yeah, well,
And maybe that's what I need to do.
I
But-
just say this is difficult. So when I'm not
Understood.
looking at my computer, looking at the PDF on my computer, it's not in front of me, we don't have laptops.
I understand. I do understand. So we will strive to try and figure out a way to address that. It is challenging because of the size of the tables that are embedded in this document. There's a lot of back and forth between and section breaks that provide that go to landscape so that so that it's readable. But the computer or the printer doesn't like them.
You had another question.
No, those were the two statements that I wanted to make. It's difficult. So when we're in here, it's difficult. Difficult.
Go.
But, yeah, I'll try to see if I can work it out on my computer. See what happens. And
So-
bring it as a,
Awesome.
Am I hearing you say that we're gonna go through this exercise again at our next meeting?
No.
A summary.
No, well, at our next meeting,
But-
I would say it's a
I'm ready
very,
to vote now. We
I-
have, we
I'm
have.
fine with
six-
that.
We have 6 here right now.
Yeah.
Of a 9-person body. That's why we have alternates. I wanna respect the other 3 that aren't able to make it, but it's no different than when we haven't had Charles. Or if one of us isn't here, that's
Right.
not a reason not to.
what you're saying is we
move
have a
forward.
quorum and we should vote.
That's what I think.
I think that's what he
I
said.
don't have a problem. That's why I said the only difference is that we have our chair and a couple other
Right.
members that
So-
may have wanted to weigh in.
Do we have to ratify this like we would do
Just
so,
move to approve. to
so-
move it on.
at our next meeting?
no,
Okay, I didn't think so.
no, because this is not a final approval. This is This is for planning purposes.
Right.
What I'm trying to do is I want to make sure that as we move forward in the next steps that are built on this, that we don't get down to the end of the process and somebody says, but I don't agree with what you did down here, which was the foundation for
Right.
the whole comp plan.
And
Yeah,
don't we-
but remember what that does mean. When a voting body votes, no one else can come back in, that's law, and say, I don't agree with what you guys did. We all have to say, it is the law, it is the reason, it is the rule, that's what we voted on. Everyone has to say, well, how about that? No one can come back and, I mean, it's a RCW. You just can't come back and say, well, we should do so because I wasn't here and I don't really like what you did. I don't think any of those people would do that.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't think anybody would
Right.
do that. So I think,
Okay. And
I would say, let's vote.
Totally agree, and it could be a quick 5-minute summary
I think we have,
if they have any questions, but the only reason why I'm bringing this up and I don't want to come off as I don't care about the 3, because I do,
No.
but we have committed to 2 meetings a month for
Right.
almost all year. And I don't think it's wise of us to drag our feet because we're missing some members.
okay, agreed.
Good point.
So I'll make a motion to approve the land capacity analysis for the 26 comp plan.
Second.
We got a second and a third. Any other discussion?
Recommend, sorry,
Any other discussion?
sorry, yeah, to recommend.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Ayes have it.
Thank you.
We'll
you.
explain that, and please, in the minutes, would you, we'll encourage the members that were not here to not have a conversation about it on group emails. We can, if they have a question, they'll bring it to the next meeting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will put that on the agenda, just kind of, just to touch on that real quickly. So next slide, please. So now I just wanted to pause. No, I just wanted to pause for a second on this, just based upon what we talked about last time. I just wanted to share with you the schedule and when things will be coming back to you, but to know that there are other things going on with climate in the background. And so here we go. So the update and schedule. Next slide, please. It's one slide. How painless is that?
Great.
Good job.
We're just used to you giving us 10 slides.
And we can't see.
The consultant prepared it for me. So I wanted you to know that, so the CPAT is moving forward and that we have, workshops scheduled, mitigation for the 29th and 30th, resiliency for February 18th. And, just the CPAT working on things throughout. We have the resiliency map. We have a story map that's going to be presented first to the CPAT. And if they're good with it, we will be posting it on the website, and that will give people a lot of opportunity just to understand what potential risks we're going to need to be mitigating. And for the Planning Commission, you won't be seeing this again until June 11th for the greenhouse gas goals and policies review, which is going to be coming out of the CPAT. And on the 25th for resiliency goals and policy review. So I just wanted you to know that based upon your recommendation, let CPAT run with it and bring it back when you have something for us to chew on. That's our schedule right now.
Send this out, the schedule out to us?
I absolutely can.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other engagement pieces that we have on there? I don't see.
Well, so this CPAT and then we are gonna have outreach and surveys going on through the course of the summer.
Okay.
And we're gonna have the draft of this done by October of this year, because we are gonna be submitting it to Commerce. They require for the climate piece, 120-day review. But here's why we're doing it, because if Commerce reviews our climate chapter and gives us a thumbs up, if we get challenged as a city, they will defend us. And so it's a firewall for, if you'll forgive the
They're making us do it. They should defend us when we do it.
What's the likelihood of the 6 month? I read someplace some of the jurisdictions are asking for an extension.
We are. In
We
fact,
are.
we are. It's on our legislative agenda, and we just heard today at our PTAC meeting, okay. Bonus, does anybody remember what PTAC is? Planning Technical Advisory Committee. I'm sorry. So we had a PDAC meeting today. Anyhow, long story short is that, we just had the update that, the counties are, the Association of Counties, that Scott Chesney is shopping it with all of the counties in the 2026 round, and that everybody's supportive of it, and that they're all each talking to their individual legislators. They actually have the proposed amendment to allow that 6-month extension.
6 months, okay.
Okay, now having said that, and this is, I want to say this, that our schedule is, even if that gets approved, it's not that we intend to
They
change
worry
our
about-
schedule, because there's so many things that could blow up on this as we go down, that's just. But it would be nice to have a little bit more time on the, particularly the development code side of things is my
But
feeling.
don't change your schedule.
Right,
That's, give me time.
yes. Yeah, so that's, anyhow, so that's, that would be that. And next slide, please. On to citizen comments. Do we have any, Evan, do we have anybody, I can't see if we have anybody in the. Okay.
Okay.
No citizens in the audience.
You report.
Next, so secretary's report. I have my agenda here somewhere. First of all, I just wanted to let y'all know that we do have a design review committee meeting scheduled for the 22nd at 3:15, just before our regular planning commission meeting.
For
To
the
look at
Camelot
our
project.
third review of Camelot. Um. There's that. I did want to talk about the parks plan. So we had an RFP out for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which, by the way, is going to be handled by the Parks and Arts Commission, and it'll come back to us. We'll have some updates on that, and then they'll be presenting it, and then we will take that plan and kind of write our parks element and append that as the full plan as an appendix to the comp plan. Right now, we had 6 proposals. We are moving forward with 3 interviews. We have 3 interviews on Monday. And what we're likely to do, in part because of the kind of the discussions around capital facilities with city council, we're going to be awarding the contracting phases. So we're going to have them do the demographic and needs analysis and inventory and park, schools, and policies as a first phase. And then we'll look at the master planning, the parks planning as a second piece as a secondary piece of it. That'll give council time to have conversations about funding for capital facilities. And I think it's kind of, we don't want to get the cart too far before the horse. So that's that. Network analysis, talking to parametrics. For those of you who may remember, Charles Allen was the transportation planner that did our last network analysis. He is available. He's with parametrics, but he's based in the Salt Lake City area. And he and PJ are working on a scope that we're going to be bringing forward to city council sometime in February. We intend to kick that off in March. Obviously, this land capacity analysis was a critical path on it, and we will have some conversations on land use before that gets underway, so that they also have any changes to land use, which I don't expect tons of, given the results of our land capacity analysis. But again, that will feed into it also. So those were the 2 that I just wanted to, I will be reporting back to you when we actually have them on board. Oh, the last piece is that we, at last night's council meeting, city council awarded a task order to SCJ Alliance for housing policy. worked, so, for our next meeting, our January 22nd meeting, guess what? We will just touch base briefly on the LCA. Questions. And we will provide you with kind of a schedule for a review of our housing element. But the main event is going to be a review of our critical area. So we
Which
have.
we don't have much of, you said.
But we have a requirement in the comp plan to address it. So we had SCJ Alliance complete a critical area ordinance checklist. Which is a requirement of the comp plan. They did a memo regarding recommendations, which we have some minor updates to our critical area ordinances. I'm actually planning on providing you with, and I will be working on this over the course of the next week, red lines for the critical area ordinance amendments, because this is low hanging fruit. Kick it out there, and then we have a folder on the P drive where we're starting to put our development code amendments.
When you send the LCA out to all these agencies that are maybe in the city and outside, do you give them a time frame to respond? Yeah.
So I have already shared this draft with Commerce, with our Commerce rep. I've already shared this with the PTAC, saying this is draft only. Some of the smaller jurisdictions that have completed their LCAs are presenting to the steering committee of elected officials at the end of the month. I said that we would be happy to present after council provides us the blessing on this to move forward for planning purposes. I'm holding off to share it with other agencies. I don't want to get too far ahead of us in terms of the water and sewer purveyors, Spokane Valley Fire District, or in terms of the school district, because I want to make sure that what I send forward, that they're not getting it.
But when you send it out, do
Yes.
they have like 30 days to respond, or 2 weeks, or is there a time frame that you give them?
There is not necessarily a time frame, but we have those agencies, they've all heard about and seen our working draft schedule, which, by the way, this schedule is going to change almost every month because we kind of have moving parts and pieces. But we do have them, we do have our utilities and essential public facilities folks scheduled for specific workshops with you, as we do our emergency service providers. This is all part of so the utilities thing is, we're not looking at that until the summer, but that will give them time to look at this and look at it within the context of their own master planning. When I send it out, I'm going to be also sending it with the concept that we'd like you to come back to the Planning Commission at this date and share with us, here's our utilities and public facilities chapter. And, we'd like to talk to you about,
Be prepared to discuss it in the context of the
do you have
LCA.
the ability to meet this group? Yes, that's absolutely, that's why I wanted this document, so that I could send it out and have that kind of contextual, like, oh yeah, we want to talk to you about this, but we don't yet know what our what our target is.
Okay.
And with that, we will be meeting in 2 weeks, and I will do my very best to get the packets out to you. This is going to be a little bit more challenging because of the rhythm of this, between council meetings and couple council meetings a month, couple planning commission meetings a month. So I hope you will bear with me if, like with the critical area ordinance, I will say that that we got it done, but the LCA, it was a challenge to get it done in time for this meeting, but we got her there.
Well, it was a hell of a job. It was done well.
Good job.
I'll say
Thank
that.
you. You've seen a few of these, haven't you?
Yeah.
Any commissioner reports? Joe would want to remind us that the Department of Commerce does a short course on local planning. If anybody hasn't done that yet, it is well worth the time. It's about 2 hours of your time. Tuesday, January 21st, between 1 and 3:30. Thursday, February 20th, between 6 and 8:30. And Wednesday, March 19th, between 1 and 3:30 again. Go
Thank
onto the
you.
site and it's there, you can register, you can watch it remotely.
And let me just say that I want to thank you for your dedication. And for bearing with me as I go through my wonky reports.
Motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
That's what I'm saying.
All right, let's go.
Get out of it.
Thank you all.
Second.
Second.
Quick announcement, while you're here, if you haven't seen an email from me, just a reminder, I sent out an email regarding active shooter training. Not required, strongly recommended. I've gotten a response from Phil so far. If you're interested, let me know so we can get it scheduled. If you don't see an email from me. What is it? Active shooter training. So if somebody walks in here with a gun and starts firing it off, we want you to be prepared for that and know what to do. And so if you're interested in that, let me know.